Good evening. Welcome to the newsroom on the campus of Cedarville University in Cedarville, Ohio. My name is Dan DeWitt. I'm a Bible professor here at Cedarville University. I'm also the director of the Center for Biblical Apologetics and Public Christianity. I'm excited about tonight. It's our first apologetics seminar of the semester. Our Center for Apologetics does three things. Once a week, we have a caffeinated conversation where we talk about what's going on in the world of worldview. I typically just sit in the coffee shop and meet with whatever students, whoever wants to show up. Because of COVID and out of an abundance of caution, I've been doing that event, which we call Mere Caffeination, online every Friday morning. If you want to join us, it'll be Friday morning at 8 a.m. on facebook.com/Dan DeWitt. Once a month, we do an apologetics seminar. That's what we're doing tonight. This is the first of the semester. Normally, we do one seminar a month. This year, instead of doing an apologetics conference, which is the third thing that we do, again, because of COVID, instead of having a conference with a lot of people gathering together, we're just doing more seminars. Tonight's the first of our seminars for the semester. I'm so excited to describe to you our guest and welcome him here in just a minute. I'll be joined in a moment by Flame. He's a Grammy-nominated Christian hip-hop artist. He's also a theologian in his own right with 2 degrees in biblical and theological studies and has his eye on the prize for a PhD in theology as well. We'll be talking about his life, his art, and whatever else comes to mind. He's a dear friend of mine, a partner in the gospel. Please welcome with me, Flame.
Yes, Dr. DeWitt, glad to be with you, my guy.
Man, it is good to see you, Flame. Tell me, how are you doing?
Man, I'm doing well. I'm hanging in there. 2020 threw me some fatal blows, but God is faithful. He's sustaining me, and I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to still be inspired, creative, so I'm having a good time.
So you're coming to us from your home studio in Florida?
Facts.
And yes, you've been in Florida for, what, 2 years now? Is that right?
Yeah, 2 years. Yep, 2 years now. It feels like home. Right now, as of earlier today, it was 80 degrees, so I'm not mad at that.
Man, it is like 2 degrees here in Cedarville. We have over a foot of snow, I think, on the ground. Wish you were here, Flame. We could use the heat.
Hey.
Now, let's just go back a little bit and talk a little bit about where we first met. And I love to share this story with students. You were in one of my classes, and I had no idea who you were, but I knew that you traveled a lot. And so regularly you would ask for prayer. I'm traveling here, or I'm traveling there. And finally, I don't know if you remember that, finally I just said, "Who are you?" And I don't know if you remember, there was a kid in the class whose nickname was Blank Check.
Yeah, Blank Check. Yeah.
The light bulb went off for Blank Check, and he turned around and he said, "You're Flame." So, and I think that was the semester that you were nominated for a Grammy. If I might be, it was around that time frame.
Yeah, it was in that space. Yep, 2009-ish. Yes.
So,
yeah.
So for people who might not be familiar with your ministry, familiar with your music, tell them a little bit about the Flame story. I mean, and so you don't have to go all the way back, but you can. I mean, I'm thinking Ambassador, his involvement in your life. Just tell them a little bit, give them a 30,000-foot view tour of Flame's discography.
Yes. You know what? So I am from St. Louis, Missouri. I grew up influenced by Christianity. My grandmother was the strongest pillar in my family in terms of the faith. And I always loved rap music. I was always influenced by hip hop culture. So eventually I started doing music myself. I became a Christian at 16. I was in a tragic accident. The Lord saved my life. I was invited to church, became a Christian. I started writing music that communicated my faith, but also my worldview collided with my faith. And that led me to being in front of people, sharing the good news of Jesus. I met a group called Cross Movement. So hat tip to those guys. And Ambassador, you mentioned him. He's one of the spokesmen of the group. So they really helped me understand theology, give me a bigger appetite for it than what I had already had. And I started to travel the world with them and started learning the ropes, music industry, culture, representing my faith in a public square. So, man, I really learned a lot from them. And here I am today, still sort of carrying that mantle And man, I got a lot of stories, but God has been good. I love it. I love it.
Amen. Now, your album that
Yeah.
you were nominated for a Grammy for, was that Our World Redeemed?
Yes.
So talk
Yes.
about
Our
that
Redeemed.
two project that led to
Yeah.
that.
Man, it was so interesting. So I was out just sharing my faith in the community, my neighborhood. And I remember I was talking to this young dude. He was probably like 15. And I was trying to give him like the gospel narrative, sin because of Adam, fall, creation, all that. And he was like, what are you talking about, bro? Like, who is Adam? And I was like, wow, there are people in America who don't know who Adam is.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, you know what? I'm going to do a 2-part project that talks about the fall and then redemption. So that was Our Redeemer is the second part of that, you know, that sort of that narrative, that drama of redemption. And yeah, it was nominated for a Grammy. I was shocked. I was actually watching Everybody Loves Raymond when I got the call. I didn't believe my manager who told me, and it turned out to be real. So yeah, it was crazy.
Now, what was that like going to the Grammys?
Ooh, man, it was surreal, honestly, because I saw really all the artists that I had grown up to or was inspired by for the most part, but I was intentional about being there as a gospel witness. So yes, I had my nice fly suit on, but at the same time, I had Bible tracks and I was ready to share the gospel with the celebrities. And so it was cool to have sort of that sacred secular, you know, collision in my own self while being at the Grammys. You know what I mean?
So, looking back over your music that I'm familiar with, you know, there's so many songs that come to mind when I think about you, songs that stand out for me, and then also songs of yours that I use in my classes. You know, from your album, The Sixth, I use your song about Scripture every time I teach my Theology 1 classes. But I'm curious, what would be your favorite album? I'm guessing it might be your most recent, just because that's kind of how things work. But your favorite album you've done, and then also, what's your favorite song that you've done?
Ooh, man, that's difficult. You're right. So I would sing the praises of my new material only because it's fresh, right? So I'm calling it the Extra No series. So Extra Nos and Christ for You. But in terms of a throwback favorite, it's probably going to be, for me, God Knows, I would say, because I got to show a part of myself that I hadn't shown over the, 10 plus year spectrum. So when I hear it, it even takes me to a personal place. But favorite song, man, it's probably one of my favorite songs is Start Over featuring NF. And I say that because I just went to a different place to write those lyrics. And I didn't imagine it having the reach that it would have. And I think now it's somewhere around 36 million views, something crazy like that. So every time I perform that song, I still tear up. I still thinking about the sweetness of the gospel. And yeah, it's just like a new song to me.
For someone who's not heard that song before, explain a little bit about the message behind the song, because when I see you perform that live, it really does affect the audience. And I think that the message is so powerful and people are hungry to hear that. So talk a little bit about the message behind that song.
Yeah, it's a special song because one, it's the simplicity of the gospel. It's reminding people that no matter where they find themselves in life, they're never too far out on a limb for God to reach down, rescue them. They're never too caught up in any situation that they're so ugly or disgusting to God that he doesn't see them as being worthy to save. So when people hear that message that they can start over, that God isn't exhausted with them, he isn't ready to throw them over because he's just fed up and he's had it. When they hear that, I think it takes them to that vulnerable place where they say, God, you see me in raw form, and I'm being reminded that you're still gracious enough, patient enough, kind enough to extend your grace to me. And new Christians, mature Christians alike love hearing that message afresh. And that's what I enjoy about, performing that song.
What was it like working with NF? He just seems like such an intense person. And I love the video you guys did. Was that filmed at the Grand Canyon?
Yeah, that was at the Grand Canyon. It's so funny because I crack a joke. I say, when I worked with him, he was lowercase NF. Now he's capital NF. So it's just a little inside joke. But I got to work with him earlier on before he really took off. So I feel like I got to know the person before a lot of the attention was on him, and I really liked that dude, and I imagine he's still the same. I don't keep up with him regularly, but yeah, it was good to work with him. Super creative, super talented, very intense, and I like that passion he brought to the record, and it stuck in the record. He captured that,
Yeah.
so I love that. Yeah.
You know, when I think about your career and then just Christian, contemporary Christian music in general, Christian hip hop specifically, how have you seen the landscape of Christians who are involved in music ministry at a professional level? What's that look like from your view? How has it changed? Where do you think it's headed?
Yeah. You know what? It's interesting too. So coming in the music industry when I did with Cross Movement Records, they were really intentional about heralding an explicit gospel message, New Testament content, didactic Bible teaching. And that was very healthy for a lot of us young Christians at the time to get that solid foundation. And then I think the next phase became, okay, that's great, but how do we engage those who may not have an interest in Christian theology? So then we were sort of forced to think about that. And it was uncomfortable in many ways, but I think looking back on probably the last 5 years, a lot of good came from it, where it caused us to think more about how to take these black and white exclusive realities that the Bible gives us and make them more palatable for people that may not be as familiar with Christianity. So it was a learning curve in terms of all of us as artists and fellow artists and fans to understand that shift. And I think it was a bit turbulent, and then to sort of settle out. And now my hope is that the two will mash in a sweeter presentation of good art, a high view of good art, a genuine concern for where human beings are psychologically, emotionally, the worldview in which they process life, and being able to communicate to them Christianly from the scriptures in a way that doesn't seem off-putting, but it doesn't shy away from the intensity of this ancient message that we're forced to represent. And so I'm expecting probably within the next 10 plus years that it's going to be a more beefier presentation of influencers and Christian artists who understand both of those sort of pillars and functioning on both of those pistons. And I think it's going to make for good art and good gospel representation and culture.
Well, I always appreciate your optimism and your energy. And so there really isn't a whole lot you haven't had the opportunity to be involved in. You're an author, started a record label, you've worked with so many different people who people watching this video would be familiar with, so many different artists, but you've also kind of worked a little bit in movie production. You started a movie recently. Talk a little bit about that.
Yes, so I was starring in a film titled Discarded Things, and the film was developed and produced by a woman named Karen Abercrombie. She had a leading role in the Christian film War Room. She was the grandmother, I believe, or the mom, and so she had an incredible presentation in that movie, and she just wanted to do her own. So they reached out to me. And I'm like, well, I'm not necessarily an actor, but I could sort of see myself going there. And so I went, and it was an interesting experience. It's a completely different art. And what I had to struggle with in myself was I felt a bit inauthentic. And I sort of not pride myself, but I sort of pride myself on being an authentic person. So it took a while for me to realize I'm not faking. I'm just embodying a character so as to serve the persons watching the movie. When I got that in my head, I was able to really kind of jump into the character. But it was fun. I think it was a great redemptive message that's on PureFlix now, if anyone's interested. And I think it's over 1 million views there. Wow. So they may be hitting me back for some more stuff. So it was fun. It was super fun.
So you're open to doing more of that then?
It's weird. I don't know if I just like the pain and the torture, but because I told myself, I don't know if I would do that again. But seeing the final product, I was like, you know what? I think I might. So yeah, I am open. Yeah.
Well, a couple things I'd like to talk about this evening. One of them relates to your journey as a theologian. And,
Mm,
in recent years, you went from graduating with an undergraduate degree from a Baptist institution, and then you went to get a master's degree from a
yeah,
Lutheran institution. And so, as you're thinking through these theological priorities at at the two institutions, and your
yeah,
own personal journey and thinking through theological priorities. Not always that it's one side against the other, but sometimes it literally is an issue of priorities. Talk a little bit about where you're at now, where you're going to church, what you're really finding as standing out and being a major doctrine that you want to focus on. Where are you at now in your journey?
yeah. It's been an interesting journey, and honestly, I've appreciated every phase of it. My Christian experience started in what's called a full gospel denomination, which is a blend between Baptists and Pentecostals. And I went from that to Calvinistic. As you mentioned, my undergrad training was at a Baptist Reformed, for the most part, school. And now I find myself in a Lutheran space. So, what I'm appreciating is the good among many Christians who are genuinely concerned about God's glory, accurate representation in the world for his name's sake. And I've enjoyed the emphasis that I've sort of experienced at each pit stop. But now, one of the things that really drew me towards Lutheran thought was really just this idea of extra nos, that salvation being outside of us. There isn't so much of, at least in my experience, an internal focus, which I think in culture today, people are really sort of suffocating and drowning underneath the pressure of looking within themselves to love themselves with such an intensity that they overcome childhood traumas. There's just a lot of talk in today's society about looking within, find something inside of yourself to feel good about, to talk yourself into a greater appreciation for yourself and for life. And all those kind of ideas really started to wane as they showed up in some of the way I was processing theology. And when I was exposed to Lutheran thought, it really lifted me out of that with some doctrines that I thought was weird at first. I was like, Lord, what's going on? Like, help me if I'm falling for a cult. Like, literally, that was my prayer. And, but as I was able to sort of relax, walk through the scriptures, walk through church history, and see a lot of these ideas have been preserved for well over 1,500 years, and they were very normal in terms of the means of grace that God has instituted. Those things I started to see in scripture, see a sort of consensus in church history, and it opened my heart to exploring it further. But again, hat tip to my professors at Concordia Seminary, this Lutheran seminary. They also encouraged me to not abandon all the good things that I've gained along the way, because that would be of no value just to throw the baby out with the bathwater in that direction either. So really, I just appreciate where I am now, and also the journey that's taken me here.
Well, I remember when of course, you're from St. Louis, so finishing out your MDiv studies at a seminary in St. Louis, a conservative, Bible-believing, gospel-focused seminary, although not the same denomination as where you were in Kentucky. It was interesting, a professor from the school you were at in Kentucky actually made this transition around the same time that you did to Concordia, which kind of illustrates the point that, Christians can be united around the gospel and differ on some of these priorities, some of these different emphases that we would have between denominations. One of the things that I've really appreciated from the writings of Martin Luther is his focus on justification by faith. How has your understanding of justification by faith deepened as you've studied at a Lutheran seminary, as you've probably been around more people who would identify as Lutheran? How has that doctrine really become sweeter and more beautiful to you?
Yeah, man, it was really just on a deeply intense personal level, something that sank into my soul and just gripped me. And really, it was so Lutherans have a saying that justification is the doctrine upon which the church stands or falls. And just that alone gripped me. And when I started to understand that as Luther was communicating these realities, and then his young boy, Philip Melanchthon, in the Augsburg Confession, the apology of the Augsburg Confession, and I started to really delve into the scriptures and see that obviously faith is a gift that God gives us, and with that faith, as we embrace His promise, it's always upon that basis that we're made right. And the unique thing about that is it's coupled with means of grace. So you have Lord's Supper, this unique emphasis on real presence. You have this unique emphasis and historic perspective on baptism, confession, and absolution. All these things surround the doctrine of justification by faith and sort of beefs it up and really brings that extra nos reality, this salvation that's outside of us. It gives it all these new components whereby which God sustains us, keeps us, gives us peace, but not based upon anything within ourselves. It's not that your sanctification is sort of proof positive that you're in, because there are moments where your sanctification may not show you how good you are. It may show you how bad you are. You feel me? And so what do I do then? And it's in those moments that you're reminded the words of Paul, that it was accounted to Abraham righteousness when he, latched on to this faith gift that God had given him. And so it's always pointing outward to what God has done. He's doing all the verbs, as one of my homies, Lex, would say, from the Wittenberg Project. He's doing all the verbs. He's saving, he's forgiving, he's coming to us, he's rescuing, he's baptizing. So that justification by faith was solidified in a way. I said, man, even if people disagree with the Lutheran construct, let's create a Christian environment where we can talk openly, where we can discuss deeply, and just really revisit church history afresh together as friends, as family in Christ. And I think that would make theological training more interesting. It would be funner, and we would have a more broader scope as to the collective contribution from church history that I think sometimes goes, forgotten because we're so in our own camps, in our own pockets. But we need to come together. So I think that's what the music allows us to do, is to break out of that and just hear what we think and how we think differently, how we tick. And I love that. I love that.
Well, it's funny how with a historical figure, it's kind of safe to be like, I love Martin Luther, but do you love any Lutherans today? And so it's safe. Like maybe in a Lutheran camp, I love John Calvin, but it's Calvinists that, I get in trouble if I associate with today. And sometimes, to remember that we value not only the historical person, but people who are still carrying out that legacy in a contemporary fashion today. And so you and I I've always loved the fact that we could talk about issues and find our center of identity together and partnership together and friendship in the gospel. And there's so many things we could differ on, but this is where I think that Albert Mohler, Dr. Mohler's theological triage is helpful, because of utmost importance is how we're made right with God. And justification by faith is at the heart of the gospel. And it's also at the heart of the Christian life, as we're struggling with our own anxieties, our own sin issues, our own doubts, to remember that we find our affirmation, we find our consolation, we find our encouragement, not in something, like you said, in us. Those things can be encouraging as we see the Lord at work in us, but ultimately to look back to the cross. That's where we anchor our faith in what's been accomplished through Christ on our behalf. So praise the Lord for that. I do want to ask you though, so anytime you move from one camp to another, there's always that possibility that it causes friction, challenges, people feel hurt. Have you experienced any of that in kind of moving from one camp to another? Have you experienced alienation, people feeling hurt? You don't have to name names or anything like that. Read hateful emails.
Yeah, it's been some of that. I wouldn't say it's the majority of the experience, but it's been some of that. But one, I would like to think people have come to know me over the last 20 years to know that yes, I am, very out front with what I think and what I believe. I wouldn't feel comfortable thinking Lutheranly and sort of hiding that so my Baptistic fans will keep booking me and keep liking me. I can't exist in that skin. So part of it is just my personality, to be honest, to be upfront. And then I would also hope people would see at one point you championed this personality as I confronted, charismatic prosperity theology. So now when I'm saying something that sort of pushes on your safe zones, I would hope you would see, man, Flame is still being an authentic version of itself. So just see the innocence in that and give me the grace and the benefit of the doubt that it's not divisive. I get no joy from being divisive, but I'm really trying to spark dialogue, but in a way that's, I guess, vigorous. You know what I'm saying? But I think that makes for great discussion. You know what I believe is on the table, but for the most part, people have been open-minded. They've appreciated. They have things to Google, and so I think it's just been great dialogue by and large. But there are some people that have been in their feelings, but a lot of times they end up coming back like, yo, at first this sort of rubbed me wrong, but after I was able to breathe a little bit and do some digging, I can at least see your train of thought. And for that, I appreciate your transparency. So they normally come back around, which I appreciate the humility, because it takes a lot of courage and humility to do that. So, and I try to do the same. If I'm off somewhere, I don't have a problem saying, sorry guys, I was off there. You know what I mean? Like, that's just part of learning, being an adult, Yeah.
Switching gears a little bit. So February is Black History Month. And so talk a little bit about what Black History Month means to you. And then I want to switch from that and think about, as the confessing, gospel-believing church in the world today, how do we think about Black History Month? In North America, as Christians who want to be faithful to Jesus, but also want to make sure we're talking about these issues. How do we think about it? How can we make progress together as we strive towards unity? So first begin with, what's Black History Month mean to you? And then let's talk about the broader conversation within the church.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you asking that. I think, one, I appreciate that somewhere along the line, someone fought for a moment in American space to consider the contribution of the Black or African American community to this nation. So I appreciate those who fought for that and pushed the needle in terms of, let's slow down, country that has this weird backdrop, and let's really reconsider who this community is and what they brought to the table. So I love that. But I also would love to see the contribution of African American community to this country become such a normal part of the fabric of American thought and society and education and curriculum, that maybe one day we can remove the need for Black History Month, because it would be so regularly understood as, this is a part of all the diversity that made this country what it is, good or bad. And that Black kids and, white kids, Asian, Latinx, Latino, Hispanic, alike will all be able to share in understanding each other's unique skin and story and contribution to this tapestry called America. And so to me, that would be the goal. Let's use it. Let's enjoy the contribution of this isolated time to reflect, but let's continue to press to sort of get to the place where it's so normal to talk about and think about Blackness that we don't need to have an isolated month, but it's just a part of the fabric of thought and appreciation and understanding. So that's my answer for part A. I don't know if you want to chime in before part B.
No, I appreciate that. And as I think about just it becoming a part of an organic conversation and way of living, we're in such a divided cultural moment in America, with politics, with race, with the global pandemic. And often so many of these things become just bipartisan, things that you wouldn't think would become bipartisan. So how do we, in this divided moment, speak to the issue of race as Christians in a way that's helpful, that's redemptive. Maybe part of this is what are some of the things that aren't helpful. So you can go any direction you want to go with that. But how do we move this conversation into the church with the hope that that organic conversation can happen not only in the broader culture, but really could happen in the walls of a faith community?
Yeah, great question. One, man, I wish I had the answer. But what I do think would be a good place to start, though, is if the church can lead the way. I would love if we could lead the discussion, that we can be not so easily dismissed because we have such deeply rooted thoughts and ideas and our process and our contribution to this discussion that it would be, I wish it was so rich that it felt novel and that the mainstream society said, man, we need to hear from these Christians because they got something to say. But really, we would just be drawing on ancient truths from the scriptures that talks about the image of God on all people. We would be drawing on the scriptures where we understand God's passion for justice and sort of preservation of those who are vulnerable and more susceptible to injustice. We're just drawing on the scriptures where God is emphasizing that loving him and neighbor is fulfilling the entire law. If we could sort of simplify and revisit the basic ideas of how we are to exist in people's faces as Christians, I think that might help us relax our tribalism, where we sort of move into our own corner and just become about our thing. But if we can sort of just remember as a family, and sometimes family, we fight and we have disagreements and intense disagreements. But if we can keep in mind and stay anchored to we're a family, and this is madness to the world. What if we can be, a microcosm of sort of what this can look like? Even with anger and sinning against one another, we can model forgiveness. We can model humility. We can model apologizing when we're wrong. We can show creativity in how we move in towards each other when it doesn't make sense to. And I think really just sort of starting there, hearing each other's pain, perspective. I took a class on the Crusades, and one of the questions the professor asked at the end of the semester was, having studied everything we did, now looking back at that, how do you feel that as a Christian, you now bear the burden and the baggage of this inheritance that you got from stuff Christians did a long time ago? Whenever Muslims think about you, you weren't alive, you weren't born, you didn't fight in any holy war, but when you bear the name Christ, sometimes Muslims may see you as a threat because they associate you with that baggage. And he was like, do you feel like that's fair? Should you own that? And I was like, man, great question. And I think the answer is yes and no. I think we should own it because it's true, but we shouldn't be so, overcome with the guilt that we can't function and do good in the world. So sort of juggling those two realities. You know what? I did bear the name. I do bear the name Christ. So some of that baggage and drama is a part of my heritage. I will own that. But at the same time, I'm not going to be destroyed by the guilt of something that happened. But I want to be free enough to make change in this current contemporary community and culture. So I think some of those ideas at least are a way to start.
Well, and I think too, this came to mind as you were saying that. I may not have been directly part of the problem back then because I wasn't even alive, but I can be a part of the solution today. I mean, the fact that I wasn't a part of the problem back then doesn't mean that I can't, contribute to the ongoing legacy and the ongoing problem by how I live. So, and sometimes it's just, I think you're right. It really begins with having an honest conversation where we acknowledge what's happened, what the effects are. Now, this is related, but not directly in the same vein that we're headed. But I remember you sharing with me back when we were at Southern Seminary together, and that you walking onto campus, I want to say it was the day after President Obama, after the inauguration, that was a really difficult day for you. And so I'm asking you to talk a little bit about that experience because, again, if we're ever going to make progress together, we have to realize what are some of the unhelpful things people say, think, and do. So talk a little bit about your experience that day after President Obama was inaugurated. I think it was for his first term.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, so I mean, I show up the next day, so inside of myself, while I knew I didn't agree with all his policies, but I was even caught off guard by something almost outside of myself that had been affirmed and uplifted. I even sort of like shed a tear just to see, the perception, the picture of, this man who shared a complexion as me, and whose wife as well. Like I felt like, man, I wasn't even prepared to feel this affirmation and this overwhelming sense of pride, and if pride can be used in a positive way. So I brought that emotion to campus, and to which I found a lot of hostility. It was a very somber day on campus, to which people were, why God, why? What's going to happen to this nation? And it was like a mourning, and I was just trying to understand what the majority of the students were in touch with. I was like, man, is it the fact that he's Black? Is it, or is it the policies that he upholds? I couldn't quite discern it, but I just remember thinking, is there nothing to celebrate here? I don't think any one president is going to change the fabric of this country. It may take dips or it may rise in unique areas, but I don't think it's going to be like somehow the kingdom of God on earth. So I didn't understand that overwhelming sense of disappointment. And so, yeah, it was very noticeable. And I think it was just the assumed Christian position. That was one of the problems for me. It was like, we all feel sad and let down, right? God's way has not prevailed. The Christian way has faltered in society. Let's mourn. And I was like, man, I wish we could see that there are different representations of people groups, paradigms, backgrounds here, that we shouldn't just so easily feel that and express that so blatantly. And that turns people off. It pushes people away, and it makes them feel like they don't even feel safe having this open conversation with you, because already your reflection in society is a disappointment. It's a letdown. And now I'm scared to even open my heart and tell you what's going on in me psychologically, emotionally. I can't even get to the other layers of disagreeing with policy, but also appreciating, the perception, like all those nuances I'm scared to give you, because you've shown me God's way has failed us with this man in being in power. And I was just like, man, that sucks, So yeah, I remember that. I remember that. Thanks for bringing that up.
Were you happy to finish your day out that day and just head away from campus? Was it just kind of a breath of fresh air? Like, I just need to get away from this now.
I did. I really did. It was funny because it was one of the guys who worked on campus. He was another Black dude, and we saw each other. And we kind of looked at each other, and he was just like, he gave me one of those. And I knew everything he was trying to say in that moment. You know what I'm saying? It was like, I can breathe around you. That's what that was. Yeah. And that was an intense moment of connection that we sort of had to suffocate that whole day. And only in that space were we able to say, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, leaving I was able to really sort of vent and get that off my chest. But those are kind of nuances and notes we have to be able to talk about. If I can give you one more example, like with my most recent project, Christ for You, the cover art is what's considered most likely a historic depiction of what Jesus would have looked like. Hat tip to my friend James Westbrook. Yeah. He's a historian. He did much research to find what Jesus might have looked like as a Palestinian Jew in that time period. And so someone sent me a message to say, man, your cover art looks like my boss at work. So they sent me a picture, and it was 2 rows of people. And they said, my boss is the second guy from the left. So on the first row was an Indian man. And I circled him and I said, I can see that. He does look like the guy on the cover art. To which they responded, no, I'm talking about the second guy on the left on the first row. This guy was the traditional look of Jesus, pale, long hair, long blonde hair. And I was like, how do you see that in my cover art? Like, I was like, I don't understand visually how you see him, your boss, in the depiction on my cover art. And it was some of those little notes where I was like, man, she was a white girl. I was like, she can't even feel that loaded statement that she didn't see what I saw in the cover art for her own reasons. So it's little things like that we have to be able to talk about. Why do you see that? How did you miss this so clearly? And she probably has solid reasoning for it. But again, if we don't talk about it, we can't understand the way we tick and how we process. And we'll always be apart and distant. But that's what we need. I need to know your wiring. And that helps us as a family. What did Paul say? Be eager to maintain the unity of the spirit in the bond of peace. We need that eagerness, that intensity to fight for this peace. Because if we lose that, the culture dismisses us as an irrelevant cluster of people that are just as racist as the American that they've come to know. And we can't have that as our reputation.
Absolutely not. And, Christians out of all people should deeply care for diversity. I mean, that's the picture of the throne, the throng of people gathered around the throne of the Lamb at the end of all times is representation from every tribe and tongue. And this should be at the heart of what we long for, and that God's will could be done on earth as it is in heaven, that the church could be a picture of that. But so many times, as so many people have noted, that Sunday morning worship is the most segregated hour of the week.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. I think it's to our shame. I get it, I sort of understand it, but I would like to think, that this generation of Christians is feeling the pressure from culture. There's been an unusual migration away from Christianity for some of these reasons, but I would like to think that we are doing what you and I are doing right now and have been doing for years, that this becomes the norm, that we can sort of not rebrand, but represent Christianity to a world that thinks our heart doesn't beat for these types of things that in the culture, people are risking their lives for, right? All these different organizations in different expressions in different ways are saying justice, justice, or no justice, no justice, but whatever side of the argument they're on, they're passionate about this. And there's a collision in a culture in the mainstream world fighting over race, injustice, and injustice. And I feel like we need to feel some of that. We need some holy anger, some righteous indignation, and to not just dismiss that attitude as something unholy, because the Bible says be angry, but sin not. So it's we're given parameters as to what to do with our anger, but we need some of that. We need some of that anger to fuel our Ephesians, being eager to maintain the unity. So I think I like the pressure that's being put on us, and I think it's a good thing. Yeah.
I recently heard a Christian leader say, are you more worried about being accused of virtue signaling, or do you care more about your reputation than you care about calling people to repentance for racism? And I thought that was such a great way to think about it, because often we get so worried about how we're going to be perceived. And in a day and time where there's really kind of a heresy hunt for people, if you mention too much about justice or racial reconciliation, we're going to assume the worst, that you've bought into some postmodern theory that's driving your view of, and what we have to do is say, we really don't care what you're going to accuse us of. We're eager to maintain the bond of unity. We're eager to maintain this, which means it's not going to happen naturally. We're going to have to fight for it. We're going to have to work for it. We're going to have to model it. We're going to have to be really intentional. We had a student write in, what are some ways that we start the conversation with people who have a different skin color than us? How do we begin to have that conversation of how can we move forward and begin to model this for the world?
Yeah, great question. I feel like, the cool thing about social media is you can create a platform easily. So I feel like if the people who care about these realities can link up with other people and on all different scales, right? You may only have 10 people in your chat room or your stream, your live stream, but you're creating platforms and spaces where these things are talked about. You can give parameters and rules for the discussion practically, right? So here's the nature of the discussion. Here are the top 3 things we're going to discuss. Here's what we won't tolerate: language, attitude. Let's do this for 30 minutes. And we're going to pray before, afterwards. We're going to get some quotes in scripture. We're going to take turns and hear each other out. You can develop things like that all over the internet, where it may not be something that's validated by the top of some huge Christian denomination, but on a ground level, it could be this ground swelling from just God's lay people who are saying, look, we don't know what the leader's on, but we about to lead in this situation. And that's what I have been a part of. And I'm seeing that happen. And I think it needs to happen more. I think we need to, again, let people be angry, but within safe parameters. I think we need to be able to be vulnerable, cry in front of one another. And we have to do that. We have to do that. Right now, obviously the pandemic, we can't do this in conference form like we would like, but we need to this is what we need to spend time doing, being creative in this space. So let's use the same creativity with which we come up with ideas to protest or to beat down the doors to your local government to open up your church, because this is, this is unruly and you're persecuting us because of COVID. That's that same muscle that gave you ideas to make phone calls and to protest, that same muscle, that gear that you clicked in to develop a protest for the unborn. Use that to find creative ways to get this kind of conversation going. Use music, use film, use dance choreography, poetry. We need all art forms on deck, all forms of expression to show in a multiplicity of ways the seriousness and the priority the church needs to give this topic. Because we're losing people. That's the cost. Yeah. The cost is losing people. And God cares so much about humanity, so much so that Jesus took on humanity. The Son of God took on humanity within himself. That's how much he values the physical nature of our, created experience. And we need to have that intense care as well. So, yeah.
Well, and I think sometimes, you're able often to have conversations at that level with people that you've talked about a lot of other stuff with. And so sometimes if you're coming into the conversation saying, hi, I'm Dan, good to meet you, let's talk about race, not that that can't happen, but often that is just an organic part of a committed friendship. And also, one of the things you said that we are going to, at times in this conversation, we're going to mess up, we're going to say things the wrong way, we're not going to intentionally hurt somebody, but we're going to hurt them. I remember my pastor, Kevin Smith from Highview, who is a professor at Southern, we did a conversation around this topic. And before the conversation, which is a public conversation, all the people who are going to be involved on the platform, we had lunch together the day before, and we're talking about, what are some things we want to talk about? How do we want to, respond to questions? And Kevin just said, look, we're going to give each other a license to say things the wrong way unintentionally. Like, it's just going to happen. And then he said the same thing when we got there and we're on the platform. He said, we're just going to have a real conversation. And the best way to have a real conversation, I've found, is just to have a meaningful friendship where we've talked about a million other things, and this is just a really important thing, but it's one thing among so many other things that we've talked about. Yeah.
I love that. Right. It doesn't, like you said, it can happen as a one-off, an event, but it would be more, probably easier to ease into if you already have existing friendships or some type of connectivity with people outside of your normal circle. Yeah, that's much wisdom in that. I agree. Yep.
So we've got a few more student questions. Here's one. What books or resources does Flame recommend? And they didn't ask specifically related to any topic. So
yeah, honestly, and I'm not saying this just because of where I am in terms of my theological convictions. I think every Christian, I don't care what denominational background you're from, I think we all need a Book of Concord. This is the Lutheran Confessions, but it also has the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, these ecumenical creeds that Christians abroad, Roman Catholic, Ethiopian, Coptic, Greek Orthodox, abroad, by and large, we all hold to these things. That's included in the Book of Concord. You're going to get into all manner of doctrine, justification, salvation, issues in the church, what kind of style of worships. Like, you're going to get such a broad and vast exposure and consideration of church history and scripture. It's just great to have on your bookshelf. That's one of the things I think theological training should include is pointing us. And I get it, your institution has to give you what it's going to give you. But at the same time, I think it's a true education to be able to consider more broadly. And so get your Book of Concord. It's like a library. It has, like 5 or 6 books in it. You know what I mean? So that's a great resource. Yeah.
Yeah, that reminded me too, even related to our previous conversation, that in a lot of ways you drive down the street of most major cities and you're going to pass church after church, denomination after denomination. And a lot of people look at that, not only in terms of the ethnic conversation we have, but also just in terms of denominational. Man, the church is really divided. They're not together. And in a superficial way, and not even just superficial, but there's some truth to that, right? That there is division. There are certain things that drive us to different faith communities because of values and practices. But when you mention the Apostles' Creed, at a deeper level, Christians are deeply united around these gospel priorities, and we have been for 2,000 years. And so driving down the street, you get one impression, and there's some truth to that. But if you're willing to look at a deeper level, you'll see that Christians are deeply united around these confessions that go back for centuries and centuries. So
yes, those are things we need to highlight in the divided time. Those are treasures, I think, hidden treasures that are realities, among the collective contribution of Christianity that we can draw on in this time where division is sort of the default. So if we can remember all these notes and points of contact and unity, it'll help push us closer together and move the conversation further. So I agree. Yep, absolutely.
Well, and it just keeps bringing us back to the gospel. We could be united on this. And this is what moves us out of our comfort zones. This is what moves us into difficult conversations. This is what sustains us. This is the heartbeat of the Christian message is the gospel. Yeah. A couple more questions. Someone wants to know if I could do a bottle flip. I don't think it'll turn out very good, but I'll try it.
Wow.
Apparently not. All right, so the next question, what is your favorite song on Christ for You?
Woo! Let me see. It's probably it's between the song Upper Room and Sounds Crazy. I go back and forth. But again, that's like asking a parent to choose their favorite kid. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So, but if I had to choose a favorite kid, it would be one of those two. Yeah.
All right. So in our last couple minutes, thank you so much for your time. So grateful for this investment. So in our closing time, what's the future look like for Flame? You mentioned PhD, future albums. What's the future hold? Lord willing.
Man, yeah. So as far as I can see, I definitely want to pursue, my PhD because, man, the goals that I have include theological training and the arts. So I'm trying to collect my experience and hone it into one central place where people can come, intern, study, learn culture, art, theology. So I'm building that. And I think that may be a great source for generations to come in terms of thinking about how to reach their generation and the next ones after them. So that's what I'm doing. I'm planning, plotting, and strategizing some structure, some organization that includes theological training, cultural engagement, and a deep appreciation for art. Because to me, those three pillars are a good way to stand fortified and say, we're here, we got something to say. Even if you don't like it, you're going to like how well it's done. So that's what my sights are set.
That's awesome. Now, you know, I'm going to make you do the one thing I always ask you to do. So I have asked you to repeat these lines on at least probably 20 times in front of 20 different audiences. And every time you struggle to remember them. So I hope you rehearsed, and we're going to end the night with you forgetting the lines. Can you remember the lines?
Hey, let me see. Okay, all right. So every year, this song gets further and further in the distance of my mind. So
30 years from now, I'm going to be asking you to do this still.
I'm gonna be all like just shaking, trying to recall it. All right, let me see. You could tell the size of a ship by the waves it leaves. Now, whose name has been made into a figure of speech? Now, whose debt started over the beginning of time? AD, actually in the beginning was God. And when it's all said and died, in the ending is God. Since we sinners, we need repentance. We're defensive to God. Listen, here's a sample, but I'm not just Blaze. We just blaze for Christ, not just on stage. Walk with us, Jesus, but not Kanye's, but the one that laid in the grave and raised in 3 days. Listen, the term Christian, you might not like, but it's the definition that's in it, and it is Christ-like. So there it is. We'd rather hear the seraphims wings flap than some of these raps being rapped. Just like your rims still spin even after your car stops. Then where will you spend eternity after your heart stops? Bing, there we go. I still pulled it off.
You got it. You nailed it. All right.
Hey,
well,
you know what's funny?
What's that?
It's funny that now Kanye is a professing Christian.
Yeah.
And so that lyric doesn't fit. And now people don't have rims that spin. So things change in culture. Things change, man.
That's right. Well, Flame, thank you so much for your time. And until we
Yes.
meet again and I ask you to do those lines again,
Hey,
God bless.
likewise. Thank you, my brother.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. That concludes our first apologetic seminar. We will have one more seminar that will take place at the end of the month with Erica Harold. Erica is a Harvard Law graduate. She's a practicing attorney in Chicago and a former Miss America. So join us on the last Thursday of this month, same time and same Facebook page. God bless.